So hello, my name's Kerry Francksen. My thesis is called Intimate Bodies and Technologies, a Concept for Live Digital Dancing. I officially started the PhD in 2010 and I finished in 2016, so it was 6 years in the making. But really, I suppose I've been exploring the ideas for the PhD for quite a long time. Pretty much since the early 90s, where I became fascinated with dance on screen. And so through those experiences, I became interested, and essentially I've been developing an improvisatory dance practice which aims to empower the dancer to respond in real time to the evolution and manipulation of her movements via video processing tools. So I suppose what I found out through the research, and which led me to do the PhD, was to try and find a way to champion or give more of a voice to the dancer, and to try and kind of express the importance of her embodied experience of being in digitally rich environments, and in a way to highlight the important knowledge that the dancer herself or himself brings to the application of technologies in performance. So that arose through myself being a dancer in a variety of different technological environments, using kind of markerless systems, so having been the dancer that kind of activates the technology, and kind of finding myself in a situation where the technology was the driving force and the dancer became a vehicle for exciting things to happen in the technology. So I became more of a kind of a tool myself. And I found myself questioning the role of the dancer in those environments. And so really that's where the main question came from. And so I was making work, and lots of questions arose through that. And somebody just said to me, "Oh, have you ever thought of framing this in a more theoretical way, or having a look at maybe doing a PhD?" And initially I kind of was like, no, I'm interested in the practice. I want to do the work. And then somebody said, well, you can do both of those things. You can carry on doing the practice and you can kind of have a look at it theoretically. So yeah, I then undertook a practice-based research project and turned it into the PhD. And in a way, and on reflection, I'm really, the value of framing it through a PhD was both challenging, but also extremely enlightening. And I think, in a way, I maybe would have found lots of the things that I did through my practice anyway, but they wouldn't have been as clear, let's say, or I might not have framed the questions in the same way had I not been engaged in the kind of philosophical side or the theoretical side. I've always been very clear, still very clear, that this was based around the practice. It came from studio practice. It's kind of built and been designed around the embodiment, so the dancing. So I always began in the studio. So in a way, the main ingredient, I suppose, is the body, and is the kind of the knowledge that the dancer brings. So in a way, the dancing and the practice and the moving came first, and then I used, so in a way, the technology became the framework. So I established, kind of in terms of a methodology, I established different technological frameworks and parameters. So I used a software system called Isadora, which is a graphic video programming environment. And so I learned how to program myself, because I was quite interested in the hierarchy between the body and technology. And in terms of the experiences I'd had, the knowledge or the kind of the driver came from the technologists. So I kind of wanted to circumvent that. So again, it was based in the studio. It began with moving and practice, but the technology became a means by which we could challenge the dancer, and that we could find out a little bit more about the decision making that was going on for her. So the body. The technological environment was extremely important because that gave rise to a new situation for her to be in. And so I suppose the main thing for me was, how do you establish a framework that asks her to do something different to something that she's used to before? So I was dancing. I worked with other dancers as well. And then the other ingredient that kind of became peppered, but also extremely integral to the things that we were finding out in practice. So I would say it was kind of a messy situation, but it always began with moving, was the theories and maybe the concepts and the questions that arose through being in these environments. And that led me through kind of different pathways into concepts such as liveness, which when I kind of started in the early 2000s was a big thing in theatre and performance and dance. So there were these kind of canons that existed that I was able to draw on. And then because the practice was very much about the experience, so the doing, the being part of the kind of, it was kind of a generative process. The philosophical ideas came up about what does it mean to be? What is experience? What is being active in a kind of, this idea of technology being alien somehow. So all these kind of contradictions and conundrums between the live and the digital, which kept feeding back into the actual practice and the doing. So maybe three main ingredients, but the main one was the doing, peppered with these kind of philosophical and theoretical notions that came in. And then that also began to change the technological environments. So the things that we found then drove what needed to happen next technologically, which for me was a real game changer, because it wasn't, this is the technological environment, this, I want you to wear this suit and I want you to dance in this way. It was, the dancer, so we used a lot of kind of live projection, so live video feed, and gosh, how does it feel to dance with a digital double? What does a digital double even mean? And is there such a thing? Probably there isn't. It's just another manifestation of texture and tone and rhythm and force. And so that then allowed us to go, well, okay, technologically, this is what we need next, or this is the environment we would like to dance in, or actually this is where the camera needs to go, because this is the question the dancer is asking. It's a journey. It was a journeying. All these things did weave, and some things came to the fore at certain times. So I would, I became really interested in Jean-Luc Nancy and kind of activist philosophers such as Brian Masumi and Erin Manning, because they were talking about the kind of things that I was experiencing. So I would take that into the studio and I would move and we would move. And then we would read some of the stuff that I was finding. So this kind of intersection and this weaving between, it wasn't, we did the practice, we filmed it. Of course, we did film it because that was one way of documenting what we were doing. But again, it was much more, there was a kind of like activism to it. It was kind of a living, breathing thing. It wasn't, we'll do the practice, we'll film it, we'll go away, we'll analyse it. I'll then have a look at the theories that might be applicable and we'll kind of slot those in. It was a bit more kind of unstable in a way. It kind of, which for me was, it was kind of organic. And that's why the process and the methodology itself became generative. So it was a kind of iterative cycle. And some of the things I discovered I would never have known right at the beginning, I couldn't have done. So in a way, it was a methodology. I didn't follow methods, which I could give to somebody else. But what I discovered was a way of thinking about what I was doing and allowing that thinking to give rise to the next question and to the next phase of research, if you like. Again, it was something I was always thinking about. And I think similar to lots of people, I had a busy teaching job. I did this, it was part-time. And so I was working with students, I was developing interactive modules, I was kind of working with the technology with students as well, who came up with the most brilliant ideas. And so I was kind of being fed from all sorts of different different circumstances. But no, the process was much more, what's the word? I was always thinking about it, but the times I was able to actually practice were kind of designed through the timetable. So there was certain, the summer was, you need to go and do the research. And actually, do you know what? Sometimes I just sat in the studio thinking about marking, thinking about something else. And actually, no, I couldn't. So it was an organic process, but it was also, there were pressure points. And so it kind of, it didn't work in a nice linear way. I kind of I had to do the studio practice as and when I could, in and around, all the other, and also having two young sons. My youngest son was only 18 months, so I was also playing with that. But what I realized was that even though it was about the moving was also thinking. It was thinking about what I was doing. And so I found a way to allow myself to have those moments. Sam was maybe watching Thomas the Tank Engine, and I'm going, do you know what I mean? So there was, it didn't work in the nice way that I thought it would. Actually, the fact that I'm kind of really pleased that I wasn't able to organize myself in the way that I wanted to, because it made me more responsive. I had to kind of keep finding, so the research itself was a way of reinvigorating or trying to find ways to activate thought and doing and moving. So the fact that I was continuously responding throughout those 6 years to, God, when am I going to find the time to do this, gave it another kind of activism, a different kind of spark that I think ignited the research in a very particular way. I remember thinking, God, I wish I could have done this in 3 years and just concentrated on it. But looking back, I'm so pleased that I didn't, because it's festering. The challenge and the difficulty of it over those years was part of it. It was part of the learning. So actually, I contradict myself and go, no, I'm really pleased it took that long. It didn't feel like it at the time. It felt like a really, this massive kind of weight that you carry around with you. But I don't know, that weight became part and parcel of how I lived my life, weirdly. And something that, and I kind of stand by this, is that my thesis is almost like a living archive. It's continuing. People say to me, well, when did you complete it? And you asked me that question at the beginning. So officially it was 2010, 2016. But in a way it hasn't stopped. The things that I discovered and the things that I learnt and am still learning kind of continue. So for me, that's something very special about a PhD. You go to hell and back, let's not pretend. I think that's a kind of rite of passage. You have to go to those really dark and quite difficult places, but God, that gives it its energy, and it gives it its vitality, I think. So for me, there were many moments, and in terms of my dancing, there's, if you know me, I move quickly. There's something about the kind of the energy of movement that has always excited me. And actually what I found through this practice was stillness, was the kind of just the allowing this kind of resonance of energy. And in a way that was kind of a reaction to the process, but also a kind of a life skill. It was something that you kind of go, no, I can think differently about the things that I do. And, the knowledge that you have, again, it's unstable. So I knew certain things, and I thought I knew certain things, and then I didn't know them. And then I knew something about that, but I knew something about it differently. And the kind of the differently then gives you something else to hang on to. And so the research that I'm now doing is almost like a kind of tendricle or a kind of a little fizzing from what happened in that process, and that fizzing over into other stuff, I think is super interesting. And for me, that as a process, so I'd say that's a kind of methodology in and of itself, is that you keep that fizzing going. There are things about myself that I now can accept and I know, and I think the PhD has a lot to do with that. You do learn ever such a lot about your resilience, your pressure points, those moments where you go, actually, I dealt with that really badly, and actually I should have just done that. But you know what? Hey, so what? You kept going, and you do a lot of kind of patting yourself on the back and picking yourself up. It's you find a way to become resilient, and it is, I don't know if you've experienced this, but it can be really lonely. It could be a really lonely thing, and you've got all of this stuff in in your head and in your body, and you're going, I know what this is, and can't quite get it out yet. And so then when it does, there's a real sense of, I don't know, achievement. Yeah, it's a funny one, and there I still struggle, or not struggle, or I enjoy the challenge between artistic practice and the academy. Be really clear, be succinct, say exactly what it is, what's your theory, what's your concept, and going, but the creative process is mess. No, I actually, and in terms of embodied practice, as soon as I articulate it, it is something other than that which it is. The thing is the thing itself. So, but again, that challenge and that difficulty makes you question or reevaluate what you're doing in some really exciting ways. And I think there's still room within the academy, and maybe within artistic practice, to keep having those conversations that doesn't feel resolved for me. And maybe it is something that should never be resolved. That there should always be that kind of tension, because that allows for the knowledge and that allows for the exciting kind of stuff to come out. But it did, there were points when I kind of thought, do you know what? I'm just going to do what I do. I just want to do the artistic practice. So it feels like it's being not stifled, but kind of smothered in this articulate, justify, which all good artists do anyway. There are amazing people like Jonathan Burrows, for example, who just do that in their work. They don't need a PhD because that rigor is already kind of there. But so that's kind of interesting. I think that's something worth just sitting with if you're a kind of practitioner and you're doing the stuff, is how do you manage those kind of two worlds? Yeah, it's kind of messy, isn't it? It's messy methodology. I love that term. But essentially it was an iterative process. So it kind of moved between studio practice, a process of kind of responding, reflecting, which then fed into certain ways of processing, programming, and then experiencing. And so that kind of that kept moving and kind of interweaving between being in the studio, devising the questions arose through the practice, which then gave rise to certain parameters within the technology, which then gave rise to, particular theoretical questions. And then, so the philosophy and the theory kind of was very much interwoven. I expressed it as a multimodal approach. Again, so it switched between practice, scholarship, and philosophical interpretation. So the theory became a useful analytical tool, kind of to discuss and analyse what we were doing in the studio. But in a way, the philosophy enabled me to question notions of kind of being in the research. So how did it feel? What did it mean to kind of experience the work that we were doing, which then helped me to kind of define those theories that were most important for the practice. So, and this is something that for me actually is still unresolved. the whole idea of documenting your process, again, for me, the process was the actual doing, was being in the room and being in these kind of, they were very intimate environments, you know. And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, which was so inextricably important to my research, were the people, the collaborators that I worked with. So I worked with a brilliant musician called Simon Atkinson and a brilliant video maker, Laura McGregor. And so in a way, the environments that we created were kind of, they arose through all three of us questioning this kind of idea of the dominance of the digital, and how the dancer might almost become active within these kind of environments. So that kind of interchange was also really, really, really important in terms of my methodology. So I know stuff about dancing, but the ways in which Simon would describe sound and visualize sound and the movement of sound enabled me to reflect on the ways in which the language that I used, the ways in which I thought about movement. Similarly with Laura, you know, Laura has an amazing capacity to understand the moving image and the body in space and time. And so for me, I learned so much from being with them in the studio also. And we worked, so again, it was kind of based in studio practice. So methodologically, those conversations kept feeding back into the process. And I was devising the technological environments, but again, it was trying to listen to all of this kind of information and find ways to facilitate it, not to control it. That was a really important thing, was how could we devise environments that had connections, or that there was some kind of qualitative interaction between these environments that enabled the dancer to make a different choice in the moment, to kind of experience something new. So the technology kind of wasn't, you know, and there are beautiful technological works where the dancing is so beautifully timed to the image, and there's kind of interactive sound, but that the dancer's motion almost controls the sound. So you see that definite kind of action reaction. Whereas for me, that kind of wasn't enough. That kind of didn't provide enough, I don't know, serendipity for the dancer to have to keep, you know. It was tricky, but what are you experiencing? What are you anticipating? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? And then in that moment, make a different choice about your relationship to the image, a different choice to your relationship to the sound. So again, those kind of, so maybe that's another ingredient actually, were my collaborators, who were so very generous and so very supportive. I would not have done it without them, I have to say. So yeah, that definitely fed into the ways in which the methodology kind of progressed, if you like. We didn't use methods. They weren't set methods. It was a methodological approach whereby we discovered certain things. We were able to kind of analyze them or theorize them or understand them through some kind of philosophical interpretation, but that fed back into creating an environment, or I called them kind of phases, states, that then kind of kept feeding through. And actually, in the end, what I devised was a portfolio. So I had a portfolio of works, again, which I would say were all inextricably linked. They weren't individual works. They were more markers in time. And I was able to mark, almost kind of solidify them in a way by bringing in an audience. So in a way, the audience, and by framing it in that way, was a marker for the research journey to go, well, in 2014, there was shift. In 2016, there was, you know, and the pieces. Again, I still have a problem with them being finite pieces of work, but so they had titles and they had kind of photographs that went with them, and they were all documented. But I was very clear that that was only just a means of capturing them. The works existed in that moment in time with those people in that space. But before my Viva, I performed, or we created an environment, and the examiners had to come and they had to experience the work, because that was the thrust of the thesis, was that it was like I've said before, kind of living, breathing archive. So yeah, there are photos. There are photos in my thesis. There are descriptions. There are documents. But yeah, if somebody out there comes up with a strategy for, I don't know. I don't think there is. I don't think there is one. The work is the work. You had to experience it there and then. You can't document it. Even writing about the dance. Well, that's writing about the dance. It's another manifestation of it, which is just as valuable. But actually, for me, it kind of that was a really tricky circle to square. Was that So that there are video documents of it, of course there are, but for me that's not the work itself. In a way, the thesis is 50% is the actual embodied practice, and 50% was a kind of written documentation, which in a way, well, maybe we'll come on to this, but I was asked to rewrite my thesis, because originally because I wanted it to be a living document. It was more, I suppose, poetic in a way. It was more kind of imaginative, in the sense that I was trying to encapsulate some of the ideas, some of the practice, but the examiners felt that wasn't theoretically viable, that it didn't hit all of the academy's criteria in terms of what's your theory, what's your question, what are your, quite a linear kind of standard thesis in a way. Yeah, so in the end, the thesis became much more of a traditional document over and above this more kind of poetic. There was no discussion whatsoever in my Viva about the practice. Obviously, I just performed, and it's a really intimate, it's quite a, it's a very intimate, delicate environment to be in, and it takes a lot out of you. And so I wonder, having come straight from that experience into a Viva, maybe was a really bad idea. And maybe, in a way, it had to happen like that, because you only get the examiners. They're very busy people, and rightly so. You only get them for a short amount of time. And I was adamant, and I would still do that tomorrow if I had to do it again. I would still have them experience the work. But I wonder again if there's some way that there could be a bit more creativity with how you devise a Viva, or how you go about it. Even for me, how you document how you write about it. I understand how to write theoretical papers. That wasn't the problem. It was finding the voice of the work through different mediums. I know how to do that through embodied practice. I didn't quite know how to do that through the writing. And so I absolutely understand where the examiners were coming from. And I think, in a way, they were quite cross with what they'd been presented with, because it was, this. I found out later on that they clearly weren't happy with the written work anyway. So whether I'd done a good Viva or a bad Viva, it wasn't going to change the situation. But in a way, I needed to do it that way. It needed to be expressed like that, because, as I said before, this was a massive journey for me, and it's a continuing journey. And so in a way, you kind of, you put your heart out there, you wear your heart on your sleeve, and you go, this is me, this is it. And I gave it all in the practice. And actually, maybe I did a really bad job of consolidating that, A, through the writing, and B, through being really hard with my theory. I went in there wanting to talk about the practice, because the practice was, the practice is the knowledge for me, and it always will be. But, again, I understand but we teach. I would say the same things to my students, perhaps. Well, what's your question? Can you be clear about it? And in a way, I feel like I've got 3 theses. I've got 3 of them. I've got 3 different versions, and each one of those has value in different ways. And so I kind of, it was, and I'll be honest, it was humiliating. I was crushed. It was, and in a funny way, again, you learn a lot about yourself and how you deal with feeling attacked, and kind of your brain just going to mush and kind of having, it sounds really kind of cringy and cheesy, but these experiences where you have these out of body and you're kind of sat over here looking at yourself going, how to respond to that? That you go blank. So I think for me, I was so enthralled in the practice that I hadn't taken time to consider that there might be other questions, or that they might come at it from a very different point of view. Actually, lots of it is still there in the thesis. There's a big body of writing, and so majoritatively it was a moving around and making more linear and more structured, and I value that. What I read, I kind of go, oh yeah, that's more of a very clear kind of academic type. I still want the poetic version. There's still that in there, but there was moments where I thought, do you know what? I don't think I can rewrite this whole thing. I think, and I genuinely had a feeling of, as I said, the practice was so enriching and I got so much from it that I did think, do you know what? Actually, I don't need the PhD, genuinely. And that wasn't just a reaction to being, kind of annihilated in my viva, but it was, no, I genuinely felt really satisfied with it. And so I left it for probably 6-7 months, and I had a year to kind of revise and resubmit. And actually, I didn't start rewriting until October, and I had to submit it in December. And I wrote it really, really quickly. So the one that was passed, I wrote really, really quickly, because it was kind of, it was all there. And it was only, I don't know, again, I think it was a really dear friend who said to me, why not? Just do it. You've come this far. It's great that you feel really satisfied, and good on you because I was continuing with the practice. The practice never stopped, and I'm still working, I'm still working with Simon and Laura and Mark and all of those wonderful people that kind of got me through it. And I thought, oh, well, okay, yeah, I might as well. And then I think it's just trying to be a little bit gracious and go, well, I learned a lot from that. And they did, again, I reframed it in a different way, and rewriting it, again, I kept learning and I applied the theories in a different way. And so I think if you can be open enough to, the process is really hard, and you're not going to get it right all the time. And you do feel like a bit of a wally when you go, oh yes, okay, I've been teaching in the academy for this long, and you have people, brilliant people, brilliant professors who go, no, that's not good enough. It hurts, but you go, fair enough. Nobody gets it right all of the time. And no, okay, get on with it. Just keep going. It's fine. And I learned more from that. I think, and probably many people have said this, don't be so hard on yourself. Allow those times where you don't know what you're doing, because actually those were, okay, the most challenging and frightening. It is kind of frightening where you go, I've got an annual review, or I've got to do my, I don't know, I've got to write something up, or I've got a meeting with my supervisors, and your heart's going, and you go, actually, do you know, it's okay not to know the answers. It really is okay. And I was very lucky in the end. I had a super, super supportive supervisory team, and they were really challenging, but they were, I really believed they had my back and that they believed in the research too. And so I remember turning up to some of those meetings being petrified. And I would just say to myself, you don't need to be challenged, and allow that challenge, and take that challenge on as something positive. It's not negative. So yeah, go into it with an open heart. You know, I try to, that's kind of a philosophy of mine, but it's more difficult to do in theory. But, and you know what, if you're asked a question and you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. The other thing I would say to myself is, yeah, keep going. There were moments in the studio when I would just sit and, you know, it never got to the point where I'd want to cry, but you just go, oh, I can't do it. And you know what? I would say to my then self, just go, just leave it. Don't worry about it. Don't beat yourself up. If it's not happening, there are times where you go, right, okay, the kids are at school. I'm not teaching today. I've got 5 hours. Right, I need to write 5,000 words. And you write a load of gobbledygook and you go, well, do you know what? That's what you do. Write a shopping list. Dream of something. Do you know, write down what you want to do for your holiday next year. It's fine. Let it go. I had a really favourite cafe that does the most amazing chai lattes, and I would reward myself. So if and that wasn't only, okay, so I had certain writing to do. I kind of, towards the end, this, again, maybe if I'd have known this at the beginning, it might have helped. But actually the thesis is going on even when you're not writing, even when you're not doing, because sitting and contemplating it, as you just say, it is, and you kind of can't get away from this. It is a cloud. It will sit above your head, for me, 6 years, and it was there. It never went away. And actually it's a bit like the nothing in the never-ending story. It's coming. There's nothing you can do about it. So do you know what? Let it be there, and find those little moments where you can go, no, I won't swear, but you know, let it, doesn't matter. Let it go. So for me, it was, you know, it didn't happen very often, but when I met other people that were doing similar kinds of research, you go, oh my God, thank God you feel like that too. It's not just me feeling like, God, am I doing this wrong? Have I got it wrong? Because do you know what? You have to get it wrong to find what it is. And again, what I might say to myself was, love those mistakes, embrace them. Actually, the moments where it went wrong, or the technology failed, or what I'd anticipated, was where we went, oh my God, that's so exciting. The knowledge came from getting it wrong. The people that I worked with, and I still work with them, you know, they're not collaborators, they're like lifelong friends now. They're kind of, you know, they are part of what I do. Yeah, I could not have done it without them. Also, the fact that I did have people in my supervisory team that believed in me then, still believe in me now, and kind of almost, in a way, just framed it for me, not in an emotional way, because it's a very emotional thing. It was really emotional, but, you know, just quite matter of fact. Well, this has happened. This is what it is. This is what you need to do next. So, yeah, and obviously, God, you know, my husband, and my kids were, you know, such a force. I couldn't, you know, they were so generous. You know, there are those times where you go, oh God, I'm supposed to be watching the swimming lesson, but I'm not. It's like, mummy, did you see me do that? It's like, that was amazing, sweetie. And you go, actually, I'm lying to my child. I didn't see them. So, you know, I owe them, and I owe my husband so much. You know, 2 wee little boys, you know, we managed. So they're amazing. But no, in terms of the practice, it was the collaborators. And then maybe, yeah, as you say, resilience, but also maybe it's not just resilience, it's belief and knowing. I knew, even, you know, through the Viva, and even though I had to rewrite some of these sections in my thesis, I absolutely knew, and I still know that the knowledge and the value was in the practice that I was doing.